قص خالخال بسيا بيسن كسقالي خدام لمتش لخد بخس يتلقى بخس. Welcome back to Indian time. We're here for the second part to finish off our subject that we started out on our last show, which was the Swan Massacre, which involved some of our tribal people way back in time. But at first I'd like to remind people, to those of you that haven't voted yet, please get out and vote. A lot of our existence, our survival, depend on how active we are as tribal people with the vote. We have an opportunity to vote, and I think we need to utilize that, the Suyapi way of trying to maintain our survival as tribal people. So those of you that haven't voted, be sure to get out and vote. Tomorrow on the 8th of November is scheduled for the cultural workshop that we have down at the Longhouse from 9:30 to 3:30. It's a workshop that we bring in all of our cultural elders that are part of the council or committee council for our culture committee to share the information and different things of us as a tribe, given those of you out there that may not have had an opportunity to learn, to come in and to learn from these tribal elders that we have, those that are still knowledgeable in the language and the history and the culture of our tribes. Also, this week on the November 9th, in 1908 in Kutle Huntsu, or Sam Resurrection, Moodleman, Khekeshi, and Jackson Soundown left for Washington, D.C. to protest the opening of the reservation and other issues that were happening here at that time in 1908. Sam Resurrection, for those of you that know him, know that he traveled to Washington, D.C. several times, protesting and trying to do things to protect the tribes here. And so we have in archives there are letters and requests from Sam Resurrection, petitions, all kinds of things that he worked hard to try to protect the tribes. Also on November 7th, I think if I'm correct, is Sophie Haynes' birthday. Sophie is part of our Elders Cultural Advisory Council. She was born, I won't say how old she is, but I'll tell you she was born in 1931. Also this week on the 10th of November is, we have on the tribal rolls, Octave Finley is listed, his birthday on the 1928 November 10th. But I understand that he tells us that his grandmother has always told him that he was actually born on November 1st. So, but he's on the rolls as November 10th. So happy birthday to them people who are part of our Salish Cultural Advisory Council. Okay, with that, I think we'll talk about the two new words that I want to share, place names this week. We have is Hwa'il Qsa, or Hwa'il Qsal, which is Pablo, which is known as Pablo today. In my understanding, it's a formation of trees that narrows to a point. And back then, that's how people, Indian people, marked place names with the different formations in the area, and that's how Hwa'il Qsal got its name. Also, in this area east of Pablo is a place that is called which means at the foot of the base of the mountain there's a clearing in there. And that, I'm sure, is a camp area of the tribes for many, many years. With that, we'll go back into, and I have Tom here with me, Tom Smith, who is a consultant for the Salish Pend Oreille Culture Committee. Tom has worked with us for several years, and he's done a tremendous amount of research, interviewing and talking to elders, and making a, cross-referencing the material that he finds in libraries and archives or whatever, to make sure that they're accurate. He runs this information through the Elders Cultural Council to make sure they're correct or as accurate as possible. And this is all going towards the history project that we're working on. And last show, if you remember, we were discussing the Swan Massacre. And although this is just one incident, when you listen to the information that we have on oral tapes and listen to some of the elders that we have that are with us today, this kind of things, harassment or encounters with with game wardens, have been happening in all of the areas that the people are accustomed to going and hunting, in the Thompson area, down in the Bitterroot, in the Swan, all the areas that different families are accustomed to going to these areas to hunt for their meat and their supply for the winter. Families have their special places, special areas that they go to. Sometimes it's several families will go together. And this is just, one incident that turned ugly at that time, where people were killed. And with that, I'm going to get back to Tom and ask him a few more questions here. One of the first questions, Tom, is that they say that Peyton came to the camp a number of times before the shooting started. Can you tell us about those previous encounters?
Sure. Well, and just thanks for having me again, Tony. Your viewers may be getting tired of seeing me another week in a row here, but this is, as you were saying, it's such an important story, and try to treat it with the sensitivity it deserves. And thanks again, I should say, to John Peter Paul, a survivor of this massacre, who's still with us and has said that this is a story that does need to be told for the younger people to learn. Yes, they do say that Peyton visited the camp several times before the incident took place. In fact, before even that first visit, what they say is that the people came over the Mission Mountains, and some people say they came over Chushini, the trail that goes around the south end of the missions, and some say they came over Numadla Susi, the North Crow Pass, over into that area. But that they camped several places in the Swan for several weeks before they finally came to the place where this incident took place. So they were camping at places like Npa, places that John Peter Paul has told us about, and going to all the old areas they'd gone to for thousands of years, and finally to this place Eptquomkan, a place that has the moss, I guess, that grows on the trees. That was one of the important foods, and this place must have had a lot of good quomkan there, and was named for that. And they finally came there, and they've been there for several weeks, and in fact, we were talking last time about how there were some wardens they had good relations with and some they didn't. And there was one of the state forest rangers, a man named Virgil Woods, whom they called Sarqua. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but does that sound like a word that means Roman nose? Okay. And I guess they had good friendly relations with him for a number of years, and he allowed the people to use his fenced pasture to put their horses in there. And he also traded with them. He traded some of their horses for some of their horses, and he gave them 60 hides. And later on, it sounds like that's one of the reasons that Peyton, the warden that ended up doing the shooting, jumped to the conclusion and the assumption that they'd overhunted, was because they had a lot more hides. But it wasn't that they'd killed that many deer. But supposedly Virgil Woods traded 60 hides to these people for some of their food. And so they've been there for 3 or 4 days. And then on Friday, October 16th, 1908, Peyton first came to the camp, accompanied by a local rancher named Joseph Waldbillig. And I guess they were some of the first Suyapi ranchers up in the Swan there. This is pretty near to Holland Lake, just a few miles away from Holland Lake, for folks that know that Swan Valley area. And he came into the camp, and as we said last time, the party consisted of 2 older people, Martin Yellow Mountain and his wife Sap Shin Ma, Camille Paul and his wife Clarice Paul, who is John's mother, and John was in her womb. She was 6 months pregnant with John at the time. And then Atwen Tsui and his family, his wife Dapat, and their 2 children, a young girl named Madli, who became known as Little Mary Finley. She was only 6 years old at the time, and her brother Padlasi, or Frank, who was 14. And the men were gone. So all there was in the camp were the old people and the women and the children. But Camille and Atwen were out hunting. And they came in the camp, and right away the people said they were not too friendly. They just demanded to see the licenses. They didn't ask how the hunting had been or anything, the usual niceties that wardens would usually, the courtesies they'd usually show to a camp when they came to see it. And he right away looked at the permit that Yellow Mountain had, Martin Yellow Mountain. All he had was a permit from the agent saying he could leave the reservation. He didn't have a hunting license. And in those days, many of the people kind of just recognized that the wardens were going to insist they have hunting licenses, even though they didn't think they should have them because of the treaty rights. They went along and got them. But for Yellow Mountain, all they got was a permit, an actual permit to leave the reservation from the agent. But even that wasn't good enough for Peyton. He said, well, that was no good. So they left. And then the next day, and there's a problem right off the bat about the problem of English. The only person in the party that knew any English was the boy, the 14-year-old boy, Padlasi. And Joe Enos tells how all he'd done was attend the mission school for part of 1 year. So he just knew very rudimentary English. And the rest of the party might have known a word or two, but basically didn't speak English, didn't use English. They spoke Salish. And so the next morning, Peyton came back. Again, the men were gone. He came about 10 in the morning, so the men were already out hunting. And he came in, and the way that the elders have told it, John's mother, Clarice Paul Kalodi, she told the most detailed account of this. He came right into one of the teepees and started turning everything over, looking for evidence of overhunting. And again, took the permits, demanded the permits, and they showed them to them, and he looked at them, and he looked at Yellow Mountains, and he laughed at it. They say he had kind of like a mean laugh or something about it, and just said, this is no good. And according to some of the accounts, he said, I have rights to kill Martin Yellow Mountain. Some of the others say no, he just, whatever he did though, it was clear that he was going after this group, trying to assert the strong arm of the law upon them. And he then took off, and they tried to and that time when he came back, he was not accompanied by Waldbillig, but by a day laborer in that area named Herman Rudolph, who he deputized and brought with him. And so after overturning this camp, there were 2 lodges, and I think he went in both of them and turned things over. He then tracked Camille Paul and Atwen Tsui in the mountains in the snow. He couldn't really keep up with them or find them. And they finally came back to the camp at dusk. Peyton and Rudolph came back to the camp at dusk, so it was a 3rd visit. This is Saturday about dusk on the 17th of October, 1908. And by that time, the men had already returned. And it was clear that Peyton was enraged. And he went into one of the lodges, and the men, from what we can tell, were pretty upset with the treatment that the women and the children and the elders had received at the hands of Peyton. And when he came in, the way it's told is that Camille didn't even really look at the warden or anything. He just kept playing solitaire in his blanket as if no one was there. And then finally, though, he was kind of causing a ruckus in the teepee, and he grabbed Camille's rifle, and they had a wrestling match. And this is one of the interesting points where the accounts of the whites and the tribal members diverges, because the whites say that Peyton was stronger and wrestled the rifle away from Camille, and all the tribal accounts, though, say no, that wasn't true. And that was one of the things that further enraged Peyton, was that Camille was stronger and he got his rifle back. And that Peyton then pulled a pistol on Camille, but decided not to shoot then. And it was getting dark by that time. It was kind of spitting sleet. It was very cold. And this is October, and not in the days of global warming either, so pretty cold over there. And so he went out the teepee, and the boy, Palasi, the only one that knew any English, was standing by the door, and he heard him mutter something to Rudolph as he went out. And he said that there's different accounts of what exactly he said, but basically the message was clear that he was going to come back in the morning, and if they were still there, he was going to let them have it. And some say he said he was going to kill them, and others say no, that he just said they better not be there. But it was threatening, whatever it was actually that he said.
Okay.
So.
Okay, let's take a short break here.
Okay.
And we'll be right back after a short break.
Where's dinner?
Well, I thought you'd be home a couple of hours ago, and I put everything away, so
what
I
is
did.
this? Pizza? What? Pizza?
If you had just called me, I would have known what.
Dinner ready is a pizza.
I didn't know you'd be so late.
Let me ask you something. Is it too much to have dinner waiting when I go home?
Please don't be so loud.
Don't tell me what to do. You shut up.
I thought you'd be home
I can get
earlier.
pizza at work.
I'm sorry. I'll do something better. I'll fix you something
better.
Let go of me!
Get in the kitchen.
No!
Well, it hurts. Do you want to see what hurts? That's what hurts. That's what hurts. Now get up and clean up this mess. Shut up.
I'll be quiet. Oh, please.
For information, call 1-800-END-ABUSE.
Welcome back. Okay, Tom, after the third visit and the threats that Peyton made, what did the people do?
Well, the elders tell that that night they anguished over what to do. It was a full moon night. The men had the women cook some dinner, and they sat talking about it. And they say that Atwen Tsui said, "Why should we leave? We've done nothing wrong. All we've been doing here is hunting according to how we're supposed to and getting our winter meat." But the others said, "Well, let's just not mess with it. It's dangerous. It's clear this warden's kind of crazy, and he's got it out in for us." And but then also there was concern because Clarice Paul, John Peter Paul's mother, was 6 months pregnant with him, and they didn't want to have her working around the night and traveling at night, even under a full moon, with deadfall and things where she might get hurt. But they anguished over that, but finally they decided, well, they should leave, so they began packing. And John's mother, in one account, also said she was frustrated. She had to bawl out Apat, Mrs. Tsui, because she was kind of dilly-dallying and not really hurrying up, and Kaloti was worried of what was going to happen. And they went looking for their horses, and the pasture gate of Virgil Woods, the friendly forest ranger, the one that was in good terms with the people, had been left open, and they always blamed that on Peyton, that he'd left it open on purpose just to slow them up and mess them up. So 2 of their horses were missing. and they had to ride down the trail that led from the Swan down over towards the Sealy Lake area. Finally, they found him a ways down that trail and brought him back. And finally, they got everything packed up, and they say that when they finally got things packed up and brought the horses back, that brings us to this next point.
Okay, that brings us to the Sunday.
Yeah.
The Sunday morning on October 18th.
Yeah.
And so what happened after that?
Well, they say when Peyton and, again, it was Herman Rudolph, the deputized kind of handyman, a German or Russian immigrant in the area. By the time they burst into the camp, Martin Yellow Mountain was just helping Sapchen Ma, Mrs. Yellow Mountain, who was elderly. She was kind of arthritic. He was helping her onto her horse, and just when he came in, they heard a gunshot, and I guess it turned out he'd shot a pheasant on his way in. Maybe he was just, he was so trigger happy, he's already starting to shoot. But they also tell that Mrs. Waldbillig, they stayed at the Waldbillig Ranch, Peyton did, and Rudolph and everybody that night, and they told about what had happened and this kind of conflict that Peyton was pushing, and they were so worried. Mrs. Waldbillig didn't want her husband, Joseph Waldbillig, to go, so she actually stopped him from going. And so Rudolph, who also didn't want to go, because he saw how kind of revved up Peyton was, he didn't want to go either, but he finally did. So they came into the camp, and John said also that his mother always said he smelled like alcohol, and that he figures that it was liquor that gave him the wherewithal to do what he ended up doing. And right away, it's very confusing figuring out just what happened, because it all happened so fast. But Sitsui Atwen came up to Peyton, and according to the tribal accounts, this is another interesting divergence between the accounts, but he patted Peyton on the cheek and said, "Chest squext," good morning. And according to the white accounts, he seized Peyton by the throat. So, there's another difference in the two tellings from the elders to the white accounts. But at some point, somehow, Camille Paul was the only one with a rifle, and he was putting it in his scabbard or standing there with it, but right away Peyton started shooting, and he shot Camille Paul, John's father, and he fell backwards and grabbed onto some teepee poles and fell down. And I guess Tapat, Mrs. Tsui, ran up and said, stop, stop this shooting, what are you doing? And then Atwen stepped between her and the warden, and then he shot him too. So then that was the second one that the warden shot. And then there's a lot of confusion. It's hard to know exactly what happened again, but the women were running for the brush, and they were being shot at by Peyton too. Kadoli talks about how bullets hit right over her head, and she later went back and looked close at that log and saw the bullet holes in there. Kadoli then ran back to Camille, who was just then dying, and he said to them to run for their lives. So they ran. Then Peyton shot the old man, Yellow Mountain. He also killed him. And then the boy shot Peyton in the belly. He saw what was happening and he had to do something. So the boy got a rifle and shot Peyton, who was wounded. And then right after he shot Peyton, the deputy, Rudolph, shot the boy from behind some trees on the edge of the clearing. And the women came back. Peyton was injured but not dead and was getting back up, and finally John's mother had to shoot him too. And he then got up again, and she had to shoot him twice before he died. And they didn't want to. The elders have told how they were very pious Catholics, these people, and they did whatever they could to avoid violence. One of the reasons they bought the hunting permits, but they realized if they didn't, they would all be killed. She tried to ride for help. Rudolph tried to head her off. She outran him. She finally got to another camp led by N'Chesqua, many names, and some other people. Beaverheads were there, Chief Eagles. And they came back. They to the camp. They rescued the other women that were there. They packed the bodies out. They ended up temporarily burying them and having to go back the next year to rescue them. And they had a horrible journey home, but finally got back.
Okay, so what was the effect of this incident on tribal people after the tragedy? Did the people stop going to the Swan?
No, they didn't stop going. Charlie McDonald told how the Crow Creek people, the Chief Eagles and people like that, said to him that from then on they were going to shoot first and ask questions later. So there was a new wariness and kind of edge to those trips. And some people with children probably did then feel like they couldn't take the risk, but a number of people, again, that persistence, that insistence on continuing to exercise their rights. And Felicity McDonald and others have told how they were wary and always scared of it, but they kept going as much as they could.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I know there's a lot more that we can talk about, but hopefully when we get the history project done, you could read more about it and you'll read into more detail. A couple of years ago, Tom went along with some of the elders and SK students that were in Johnny Arlee's class. They traveled to this place in the Swan, and under the Montana Committee of Humanities grant to revisit this place. And Peter Paul was able to go revisit this area, and thanks to Bob Manchester, who passed away just recently, helped locate this site for the tribal people, and it kind of brought, I guess, a small closure for John, who has always been, I'm sure that was always been part of his mind, back of his mind. So we're out of time now, so I'd like to thank everybody who has joined us for this program, this show. Remind you that to vote again, and also that on Saturday is Veterans Day, and throughout the rest of the week, remember those veterans who have given their lives and their sacrifices for us to be here today, the families and grandparents and parents of these veterans who have, some of the veterans who have not come home. We need to remember those and keep those in our hearts, similar to the lives that were lost at the Swan. Because of the rights that we as Indian people have, we've lost people in different areas. With that, I'd like to say, hope to see you next time. Lemlemch.